Welcome back to the Center in the City podcast, a space to pause, breathe, and come back to yourself, even in the middle of a full and busy life. I'm your host, Wade Brill, and in each episode, we explore mindfulness for real life, simple practices, reflections, tools to help you feel grounded, present, and connected to what matters most to you. So let's settle in and let's get centered. Welcome back to the Center in the City podcast. I'm your host, Wade Brill, and I am so glad you are here. And if you are a new listener, whether a friend shared this podcast with you or whether your curiosity brought you here, welcome. I am so excited for you to listen to today's episode where we have Lodro Rinzler back on the podcast. He first came on the Center in the City podcast, I want to say it was 2021. And we were talking about his last book. And now we're having him back on the podcast to talk about his latest book, You Are Good, You Are Enough. It's all about freeing yourself from the trap of self-doubt and returning to this concept in Buddhism called basic goodness. I got an advanced copy of this book in order to prepare for our podcast interview, and I truly love it and would recommend it to all listeners because this book not only breaks down this concept of and this fear that we're not good enough that so many of us carry. I know I have carried it. I still carry it. It is a practice to meet with a lot of love and compassion. And Lodro in this book breaks it down from a Buddhist lens, but a very modern way to think about how we can integrate Buddhist practices and bring mindful awareness to our life so that we can connect to this essence that we are whole and complete, that we are good enough. A little bit about Lodro is that he's taught Buddhism for 25 years, starting when he was just 18 years old. And he's written over 7 meditation books, including the best-selling book called The Buddha Walks into the Bar. Lodro's work has been featured in the New York Times, and Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Good Morning America, CBS, NBC. And he is just known as a prominent voice in the wellness world. So I can't wait for you to listen to the wisdom that he shares with us, to get your hands on his book, and most importantly, to support you in your own healing journey in life. We all need these tools. We all need these practices. And most importantly, we all need to know that we're not alone in navigating these certain thoughts and beliefs, that it is part of our human suffering and an opportunity to heal so that we can be more present and more connected with ourselves, with each other, and have greater impact in this world. So wherever you are listening to this podcast, whether you are getting centered and taking a walk, you're commuting, cooking dinner, I welcome you to settle in and let's get centered. Lodro, welcome to the Center in the City podcast.
Thanks for having me back. What a treat to be back with you a few years later and in conversation about, again, the things that matter most to us. So thanks for having me.
When we had you on the podcast last, it was the depths of the pandemic, and we were talking about anxiety in your last book. And so I'm so excited to have you here to talk about your latest book.
And the good news is that book absolutely cured anxiety. So no more anxiety for anyone since the pandemic. Did its job.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
Forever tools that we need to get to reconnect with. But before we get into your new book, I want to hear, what does being centered mean to you?
It's a great question. And we were chatting right before we started recording because I have the big difference for me from then and now is that I have a child now. So even the time that I had where I'd do long meditation, even if I'm doing a short meditation these days, this little being will run in and sit on my lap, which is great. And it's an interesting thing of I don't have the ability to dictate when I feel centered. I don't get to just sit down for 2 hours and meditate in the same way that I used to. Or if I do, it's going to be interrupted in different ways. So it becomes more of a choice for me. Can I feel centered in the midst of that chaos. And, from a Buddhist perspective, we would call that equanimity, the sense of being grounded in the midst of whatever is going on, feeling a sense of calm composure in the midst of difficulty. And that's like if you go to like dictionary.com or something, you will see that's the Western definition that we came up with for equanimity, to be grounded, calm, composed in the midst of difficulty. So I think for me, it's become less of a sort of a sacred state where I get to just sort of be unprovoked, but actually a sense of no matter what's coming up, I can choose to remain grounded. I can choose to remain centered even in the midst of the storm. So that's been a big shift for me.
And for you, how do you know you are practicing equanimity? How do you know you're maybe choosing to go from a state where you're getting maybe a little more swept into the chaos to one where you're feeling a little bit more grounded?
Yeah, thank you for that. That for me, it sparks this image that when I think of equanimity, I think of a mountain. And a mountain, the strong winds hit a mountain and they are rebuffed. If I was meditating, for example, I would take the posture of a mountain and I would say, okay, the strong winds of life, they come and they hit me, and I'm more able to let them go. I'm not as clinging to them. And if I sit and hold my mind, like there's an old example of a wilted flower, a strong wind hits a wilted flower, it gets literally uprooted and whipped around. So that's any time that I really let the stories and the pains of life sort of come and hit me, and I don't remain solid. I don't remain present to what's currently occurring. I let the story of whatever could be happening next in the past or in the future, those stories can absolutely uproot me if I let them. But that has to, again, I think many of us don't realize this. It's sort of a choice to follow those stories or not. And we can train the mind not to actually chase after every thought, which is why, you bring on a meditation teacher, everything sounds like a meditation. It's sort of like for anyone with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's like that only for meditation with me. This is where meditation really shines. It allows me to acknowledge the stories and not get moved by them. And that's really helpful.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And you talk a lot about the stories that we hold in our mind in the book. And I feel like, honestly, it was only a few years ago, and I've been meditating for close to 20 years. And I feel like it was only a handful of years ago where I really started to understand what it meant to have stories in my mind, because the thoughts that come up in my mind felt like just true facts. Like, well, I'm thinking this and I'm feeling this, so this is real. So I'm curious, how do you decide, or what's been your process in exploring and being able to name what's a story in the mind?
Well, first of all, anyone who is interested in this topic should go to this really great podcast I know of called Centered in the City, where Wade Brill just did a episode entirely on letting go of the stories that aren't serving us. So I loved listening to that one because it is, I mean, you knocked it out of the park. It's that sense of choice that we don't realize that we have. And that's so important to be talking about that we can be incredibly human, as you said, like it's so normal for us to have these stories. It's so normal for us to um, sometimes get swayed by them. But if they're not serving us, then we have to let them go. So in meditation, as I just mentioned, there's the act of I'm with the body breathing, and then that story comes up and I acknowledge it and I come back to the breath. It comes up again. I acknowledge it. I come back to the breath. It shifts our mental allegiance away from, oh, these stories are important and need to be dealt with, to actually what's happening in the present moment is important. Me washing the dishes and feeling the water on my hands is important. Me hugging my daughter is important. Full disclosure, last night at like 8:45, she's up way too late. We were at a neighbor's house for dinner. We come back. I'm like, I've, worked a full day, and then I went and like spent 5 hours with her. And I was like, okay, I'm here. I'm like on my last legs. And she sees that there's like this wide, vacant stare in my eyes. And I don't know who taught her this, but she goes, focus, daddy, focus, focus, dad. She saw like this reaction. So she just kept saying it to me. Focus. It's like, oh my God, I'm here. I'm absolutely here, I swear. But there is something of like those stories can pull us out of the most precious moments of our day. Unless you have a toddler screaming in your face to be like, show up for me. It is really hard for us to show up for tasting our food, enjoying the song on the radio as we drive our car. The stories really do push us out of it. So in addition to some of the on like the actual meditation, I always include in books like You Are Good, You Are Enough, this new one, a bazillion techniques on how do we acknowledge when stories are no longer serving us as part of our daily life. So the daily life practices could be as simple as noticing, oh, I'm telling myself this story over and over and over again. And then we say, okay, is this helpful? If it's helpful, great. Keep figuring out that thing. Keep figuring out how you're going to get to the airport or whatever it is, the email you're drafting. But if it's not helpful because you're not sitting in front of your computer or you're not on the way to the airport right now, the answer might come up no, at which point you're more able to put it down. So something about just getting gently inquisitive about our experience. Is this so stuck? Are these stories so real? Or can I let them go? Even just getting inquisitive starts to disempower them to the extent that we can free ourselves, come back to the present moment, and discover something underneath, which is a little more solid and grounded.
And when you sent me this book, You Are Good, You Are Enough, I just was like, oh, like I felt it so deep within my gut because this is not only my own personal journey of dealing with, am I good enough? I'm on the Enneagram, I'm a 3. And so that's part of our
Mm-hmm.
wounding is there's a lot of connection to shame and this good enough question. And it's also, it happens to be what a lot of my clients are working through themselves, this deep fundamental question of, am I good? Am I whole? Am I complete? And it took me years, even though I've been in this like self-development world for years, like it took me in my own healing to recognize the stories that I was telling myself of where I'm not good enough and how I got to recognize and name that. And then as you just said, like be able to say, is this helping me? Is this helpful to keep living into, or do I want to be in relationship to this in a different way? And if I want to be in relationship to this in a different way, let me get more curious around it. And you talk about this a lot of working with shame and guilt. And I think this is a huge gift in your book to really highlight how shame and guilt aren't helpful emotions. I mean, they're helpful in the sense that they show us something that maybe needs to be healed, but to live into the stories that are behind shame and guilt are typically not helpful. And so I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit more about how to be in relationship to shame and guilt in maybe a more skillful way.
Yeah, I think the best thing for anyone who's struggling with shame and guilt is to really beat themselves up over it. I'm kidding. No, opposite, obviously. Um, it's something that I struggle with, frankly, and I'm very explicit in this book. There are some things I'm like, yes, I know this exactly. And then there's some things that's like, well, this will continue to come up with me over and over again over the course of this lifetime. And I will continue to look at it. And the more I look at it, the less of a hold it has on me. So I tell this story in the book about, in the grand scheme of a lifetime, a pretty inane situation, which was that I was 17 years old. I was spending this summer, I did this month-long retreat at this monastery, shaved my head and took the robes, the whole thing. And about 3 weeks into that venture, I realized that I was a jerk. I had been very callous in how I broke up with my high school girlfriend. And I wasn't sensitive to like, there's no sort of like debrief. I just sort of broke up with her and I walked away from it. And it's like, God, I'm such a jerk. And I beat myself up over it for 3 days straight. I'm not even kidding. Like there were no room, but I was just like, God, what am I going to do? Finally, I said, okay, when I get back out of this place, I'm going to make amends. I'm going to go over there and do my best to actually apologize and do that. And having acknowledged, okay, there's a plan forward, I let my mind go back to like meditation 3 days later. And then the unfortunate thing happened, which is that she had moved away over that summer. So I get back to school, she's not even there. And this is before Facebook and things like that. So I had no idea how to even get in touch with her. Flash forward many years. I'm in my college dorm room, and Facebook is now a thing, and I get a friend request from this person, and I accept it, and we start chatting, and we're just catching up. And before it goes too far, I'm like, hey, I feel really badly about how I ended things years ago. And I um, just want to apologize, really, and talk about it if that's okay. She's like, that's so funny. I don't remember it like that at all. But anyway, yeah, I'd love to catch up when we're. And I was like, wow, I have beaten myself up for days and then years after that. And it wasn't even real. We do this to ourselves constantly. The thing that I hold on to still to this day, whatever it might be, it's different than what anyone would ever think, right? And I imagine the same with you, same with like the thing of but if everyone knew what I did in the second grade, or if everyone knew how much I spaced out at work, or if everyone knew whatever our thing may be, that little like, oh, but if everyone knew voice, we call this, it's one manifestation of what's called the trap of doubt, that we start to doubt that actually we're fundamentally okay, that we're actually enough. The whisper is, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not productive enough. Everyone else has their act together but me. And it becomes like this intrinsic personality trait stemming from shame and guilt. So you actually asked, okay, what do we actually do with this? Which is a really good question. I'm just talking about the negative. There's this wonderful quote. I opened up the book here. I'm just going to read. It's not from me. It's from the Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron. She was talking about how negative shame has this sense of guilt, self-denigration. She said, positive shame, on the other hand, is recognizing when we've harmed ourselves or anyone else and feeling sorry for having done so. It allows us to grow wiser from our mistakes. Eventually, it dawns on us that we can regret causing harm without becoming weighed down by negative shame. Just seeing the hurt and the heartbreak clearly motivates us to move on. By acknowledging what we did cleanly and compassionately, we go forward. And I'm reminded of this thing. I don't know if it's in this book or not. Actually, it is. Good for me. For actually remembering to include. Again, it's not my words, it's someone else's. I was leading a meditation for an organization that helps out unhoused youth in New York City. And this teenager approached me after leading the meditation. And he talked to me about some of the shame and guilt stuff that we're talking about today. And he said that his grandmother had this wonderful phrase, which is 100 different mistakes are progressive. 100 of the same mistake is regressive. I love that. Because again, two different perspectives here, but both saying if we learn from things in the past, and it helps us to become a better version of ourselves, a more caring version of ourselves, a kinder version of ourselves, then that is good. That's progressive. And if it's something that we keep running into over and over and over again, year after year, then that is regressive. We're letting the shame and guilt hold us in a state of not enoughness. So there has to be, again, letting go of the stories long enough to come back to seeing the situation a little bit clearly and saying, okay, this is something that happened. I've learned. Here's what I've learned from it. Forgiving ourselves to some degree. Again, that same episode I referred to before, you talked a lot about forgiveness for yourself, which I thought was so lovely. And coming through the other end, say, okay, now what do I do to be of benefit to the world around me? And that's certainly something that I have cycled through many times in my life of, okay, I have to learn from this. I have to grow as a human. And now what do I do to move forward? And every time I get more inspired to be of benefit to others. So I think if we use that as the momentum, then, even some of these things that we might feel guilt and shame about can become transformative.
I love that invitation to be empowered by our shame, to learn from it, to support us moving forward. And in my own experience, I've noticed that even just being able to name that shame is here is such a powerful skill. And when I can name it, this is with all of our emotions and thoughts, right? When we can name it, we can tame it. But when I can name that shame is here, it's like, okay, it can soften its grip a little bit, because if I don't, I feel like shame can totally just like wrap me and pull me down and spiral me out. And it becomes unskillful and unhelpful. So as you're inviting us to name it, to be with it, to not let it, you say, to learn from a mistake is different from drowning in shame and guilt. And I love that, just even, again, those words around drowning in it, because it can so easily disempower us. And I think a lot of us don't even recognize when shame is here, when shame shows up. But as you said earlier, it's that voice that's whispering constantly, that's saying, you're not enough, you didn't do enough, you're falling behind, like whatever it might be. What inspired you, Lodro, to write this book in the first place?
It's a good question. It's so interesting writing a book because a lot of times, like this one, it's so many years in the making. And by that I mean it's like there's the initial inspiration and then you write the thing. And then in my case, I tried to write as much of it as possible before my daughter was born. And then it went out to, be pitched to publishers and then, all of the many months that ensue of contracts and, editing and copy editing and covers, all of the things, right? So it's 3 years since I had that moment of, okay, I think this is it. But basic goodness has been part of my life since I was born. People ask, what was it like being raised Buddhist? I was raised Buddhist in New York City, and was it like meditating? And I don't know exactly, it's not like I have some sort of control situation where this is what my life would have been like without meditation. But I do know that there's something very special and unique about being raised in a culture of basic goodness. So this term that I keep referring to, basic here is innate, inherent, fundamental to who we are. So basic to who we are. And good isn't a duality of good versus bad. It's a sense of wholeness, enoughness, as we say in the cover, feeling complete in ourselves, okay. And it's an experience that we can have at any point. Obviously, meditation's an quote unquote easier way to get there because there are these moments where we do let go of those stories we tell ourselves. And in that gap, we feel okay. Oh, in this moment, I'm just here. I'm with the breath. Everything's all right. That's basic goodness. It's that simple idea, experience really of in this moment, I'm okay. So when it comes to basic goodness, I was so fortunate to be raised with that culture that I was basically good. And if something happened, so I made a mistake or whatever, it's not you're bad. It's, hey, you're basically good. This isn't reflective of who you are. What's happening here? Can we have a conversation about it? And now, of course, I'm trying to raise my daughter with that. So there's definitely the influence of, oh my gosh, what is the most important thing that I take into this new relationship I have with this being who is constantly changing and who I want to impart that to, that she is inherently, okay, good as she is, that she has that level of confidence in herself. And, when she makes mistakes as she does because she's a kid, it's okay. It's totally, this is part of what life is. And that, again, we don't fall into that shame and guilt around it. So it's a very challenging thing. So it's definitely top of mind for me. And then I have been running a meditation community online for about 7 years now, a little bit pre-pandemic, and it's continued to grow. And it's this wonderful, vibrant international group that meets, twice a week for meditation. And I send out pre-recorded Dharma talks every week and things like that. So it's very wonderful and vibrant. But we call ourselves the Basic Goodness Collective because it's just a bunch of people that believe that at their core they're basically good. And there's, this experiences we've had as a community in discovering this, helping it guide who we are and also how we relate to people we like and don't know. All of it, how society can be affected when we show up through the lens of basic goodness. All of these things shape the book. So I'm incredibly indebted to this community that's helped me shape it as well.
All right, dots are connecting for me as you're sharing. And, tying together a lot of the things that you've shared so far in this episode, we're coming back to this belief of basic goodness feels like equanimity. It feels like a way we can practice staying centered amid the chaos of our stories, the noise of the world that want to pull us out or tell us that we're not good or that we're not doing enough. And to come back to this grounded place of we are good, we are whole and complete as we are. And as Brene Brown says, shame is typically connected to I am bad. I did something bad. when there's shame, we can feel this immense layer of pain that we're unlovable, that we're broken, that we're unworthy. However, guilt, on the other hand, is more tied to I didn't do something in alignment with my values, right? I failed to follow through in that action, and that can create some psychological discomfort, but it might not sting as deeply as shame might. So, coming out of those stories and coming back to this home base of I'm good, I'm whole, I'm complete, and maybe I made a mistake, and that's okay, that's human, but I am still whole and complete. Nothing's like broken. And I feel like this, when like I really start to feel this and learn this in my body, it empowered me so much to create space from the stories in my mind that were saying all sorts of things. And it created space from the stories that maybe other people were putting on me, because I could come back to this place of whole and complete goodness. And I think in the self-development world, there's this kind of conversation that we constantly need to be worked on and quote unquote fixed. But to remind ourselves, like, there's nothing that's even broken that needs to be worked on. It's like if we can start life, as you're saying, from this belief that we're whole and complete, how could that affect our relationships, our impact at work, the risks that we take, the experiences we say yes to, the conversations we have? It's just mind-blowing and a really beautiful invitation for us to sit in, especially in this modern day world that we're living in.
Yeah, something that just sparked in me, and it's an informed thought. I apologize to everyone at home. There's moments where we might look at our bank account and we say, "Oh, okay, I'm doing okay," and there's some sense of like enoughness that's dependent on that. And then we look another day and there's a sense of poverty mentality. Oh my God, there's not as much as I thought. Nothing's working for me. I gotta change my career, right? Like, so it's that's sort of tied to external circumstances. What we're talking about here, and so much of Buddhism overall, and I would say meditation in general, is a sense of looking at that more from an internal point of view. Because if we approach the world through the lens of not enoughness, poverty mentality, you know, nothing's working, everything's going against me, it's all horrible, then our activity will flow naturally from that. Someone, it's like we talk about body, speech, and mind. So like the activities of the body, like we're constantly like, distracted and nervous and trying to figure out, the next thing. We're never present for anything. Someone says, "How are you doing?" Our speech is, "Well, here's what I'm worried about right now." And it becomes sort of really pervasive because the view is not enoughness. Whereas if we approach our world through the lens of I'm inherently okay, I'm good, complete, whole as is, and I can experience that in my own daily life. It's not something Lodro told me, it's something I can experience. That point of view, the more we develop a relationship to that, the activity flows is actually more magnanimous, more generous, more present. We're actually appreciating our life. We're here for it, which is what we want at the end of the day. And our speech, similarly, how are things going? We actually are talking about the things that matter, that actually feel like, can have a positive impact on ourselves and others. So there's something just in, it's not like, what do you do? What do you do? There are lots of things to do in the book, don't worry. But the main thing that we're talking about here is this phenomenal shift in view from not enoughness to enoughness. And if we can approach our life through that lens, then things flow very beautifully.
And I love the invitation of not just repeating, not just letting it be mental, but letting it be embodied, letting it be in our speech, letting it be in our actions, so that we're fully integrating this belief of I am whole, I am complete, I am good, and entering the world through that lens. Because I know you talk about this also in the book within relationships and within dating, right? If we start to go on dates, I know, a lot of my clients are dating or are in relationships, but there tends to be this dynamic that if we're interacting with others from this place of scarcity and not enoughness, how that really changes the dynamic. And a lot of people, and I'll especially say women, women in my experience that I've worked with, but are ingrained in this like not enough conversation and think that a relationship, especially in a heterosexual relationship, like a male is going to complete them or make them feel, or if I have a boyfriend or if I have a partner or a husband, I am enough. Like I've externally, even, you're talking about your bank account, right? Something has told you externally that now that you have this, that should make you feel enough. But that's not how it works. So, can you talk a little bit about the benefits of being and interacting or dating and being in a relationship with others in a romantic way from this place of enoughness?
Happy to. So I think that it's a really important distinction. And I written about this a bazillion books ago. I think it was in How to Love Yourself and Sometimes Other People, because it was my experience that when I was single and didn't care about dating, that was the time that people were actually like really interested in me, because there's some sense of enoughness of like, I'm not looking for anything here from you. And then people be like, oh, well, what are you doing Friday? Whereas if I was like, had that sense of, I don't want to call it desperation, but like that sense of like craving, or to use a Buddhist term, that sense of like, oh, but I want to feel like engaged in this thing. I want to be doing the thing. I know a lot of people I know, similarly meditation students who work with me, friends, who feel like almost like this is like a part-time job. It has that mentality to them. And it becomes really hard because it's like there's no joy, there's no sense of enoughness. It's like I need to get this thing to fill the hole. And here's the thing that I have learned, not just in relationships, but in general. There's two things that can happen here. We find that person, and then we say, okay, but now I want to move in together. And then we move in together. We say, okay, but now we should get married. And then we get married. Well, we should have a family. And we can continue and continue and continue to look for something more out of that connection. Or we don't get that person or that connection or whatever, and we feel let down and say, this must be something wrong with me. Both of those are not going to bring us to happiness. So we either get the thing we want and we want more, or we don't get the thing we want and we feel really disappointed and take it quite personally. So when it comes to all of this, if we come at the perspective, come at dating relationships, even, I've been with my partner for a dozen years at this point. Even in our current relationship, there's some sense of I'm good, you're good. I can come at it from that lens. Like, if there's something that goes wrong in the relationship, it's really long-term relationship like this. It's very minor things that are like, they always do this and you never do that or whatever, right? It has that sort of quality. It's like letting go of those stories long enough to be like, no, this is someone who's basically good who happened to leave water glasses all over the house. Like this is not the end of the world. There's some sense of enoughness of like, that's okay. I'm okay. They're okay. So to come at any of our relationships, whether it's romantic or otherwise, I think it's really important that we don't go to that grasping and we don't say, well, when they're happy, I get to be happy. Or when I'm finally settled into this exact framework of a relationship with this person, I get to be happy, because any relationship is constantly changing. We're constantly evolving. That person's constantly evolving. In fact, stuffing ourselves into separate boxes that say, this is who I am, this is who you are, and this is the dynamic is a surefire way to fall into calamity, because it's ignoring the reality of the situation of impermanence, that we're always changing and evolving. They're always changing and evolving. And the relationship thus must always change and evolve. So to say anyone is going to make us happy, whole, complete, with all due respect to anyone who's pursuing that, and all due respect to my wife, who is wonderful, that's not how that works. We can be whole, complete as is, and also appreciate another human being and really feel like they're so helpful and wonderful, and so we're so privileged to be with them. But it is not going to make us complete. That's the real distinction, which is hard, I think, for many of us.
Yeah, definitely is a switch in kind of where we put our energy, like where we're resting into. Like, are we keeping searching for more and that kind of craving energy, or are we kind of satisfied in that level of acceptance with what's here? And that doesn't mean settling, it doesn't mean giving up, but it means that we're not entering our life from this like hungry, starved, desperation place. Um, you also share in the book that I really loved because, as I've mentioned earlier, I've been on the journey of connecting to my enoughness and to remind ourselves, for those who are in partnerships or long romantic relationships. I've been with my husband 14 years today.
Hey, happy
That,
anniversary.
thank you. It's our together anniversary, not our wedding anniversary, but
So
yeah, that idea of like remembering he is good enough. He is whole and complete, even if he pisses me off, even
yes,
if he like is late to something, even if he didn't do X, Y, and Z. But how this ties back to the stories. And you talk about this. And I love that you mentioned this in the book because we create stories about the other people in our life doing things intentionally to harm us or to create pain or inflict, or they did this because they're trying to get me back, like whatever, again, story, versus remembering like they are whole and complete and a good person at their core, and they have stuff on their mind and
yeah,
they're doing the best that they can, and that they're not intentionally trying to be an asshole, unless maybe some people are. um but that, like, how we can connect, and that it's hard to remember that other people are good and whole and complete if we're not feeling it and connecting to it within ourselves first.
that's right. And again, it's that fundamental shift in view. Because if we are lost in our head, anxious, not enough, feeling that we're lost in the trap of doubt, so we're not enough, we will approach all of our relationships through that lens, no matter how hard we try. I'm so sorry for anyone who's like, there's got to be a simpler way. I mean, it is, I always would refer to anything meditation based as simple but not easy. It is simple to shift our mind toward a sense of enoughness. It's not easy to continuously hold it there. I think that's really the distinction because there are many moments that we might feel enough. And it doesn't always have to be meditation. It can be we're in the shower and the warm water is hitting us and we notice our shoulders start to drop and the tension leave the body. And in that moment, we're okay. And that's basic goodness too. I use the example of my daughter, like every night before she goes to bed, we do a big hug. And, I mentioned this in the book that apparently Disney World has a hug rule. I didn't know this until I started doing research for this book, where if you are one of those big mascot things like a Mickey or something, that if a kid hugs you, you never let go first because you never know how much that kid needs that hug. So, that broke my heart when I read it. And I was like, well, I'm going to do that. So my daughter will hug me for as long if she's a toddler, she can really knows that she can delay bedtime by doing a long hug, but I'm there 100% for it. And there's basic goodness, right? So long way to get there. I apologize, but there's so many moments in the day that I could say, oh, here it is again. Can I string those together to live a life of basic goodness, to hold my mind in that view, even when things do feel tough? They don't feel like a warm, relaxing shower or a big hug from my daughter. They feel like email from someone who's annoyed or whatever, right? Like that. Can I be there too? There's still basic goodness there. That's the real challenge. So it's important that we sort of have conversations like this. And this is the whole point of the book, that we string these things together. So as much as possible to live a basically good life.
Yeah, and that brings to this point that you talk about in the book, the difference between barriers and boundaries. And I'm curious if you can explore how we can discern like what to receive, what to let in to receive that basic goodness, but also maintain those barriers and boundaries.
Yeah, if people can imagine the intro of an audio medium, if you put your hands up in front of your face and you sort of block your eyes, that's a barrier. Like nothing can get in, nothing can get out. And if you separate your fingers, that then is a boundary. That there's something that can get through, but there's some sense of guardedness, right? So a barrier, Pema Chodron again, is this is another thing that I learned from her, which is that a barrier can actually be really harmful to all parties concerned. That if there's someone that we don't get along with or we don't agree with, that there's something there where we say, well, I'm just going to write them off. I'm not going to negate their humanity, essentially. They're not basically good. They're basically bad, which is, don't get me wrong, many chapters in the book about that. How do we deal with that idea? But ultimately, when we do that, we're sort of creating this little ice box around our heart of like, well, everyone can be treated with respect and it's basically good except for that person. That person doesn't deserve it. And that actually hurts us. A boundary is, let's pretend it's an obnoxious ex. It's not, I have to contact them. It's not, I have to even be in touch with them. But from the comfort of my own heart, can I still seek to understand them? Can I still seek to wish them well, maybe, or at least to acknowledge that they are basically good and acted in a confused way? Because again, I feel like I should mention that this isn't some Pollyanna book. Everyone's good, everything's fine. It's a sense of that's fundamentally who we are. And sometimes confusion gets in the way and we do cause harm to ourselves and others. So that does happen. And boundaries for that reason can be really helpful. I also talk about boundaries around the news. There's a whole chapter just about that because the suffering we are bearing witness to in the world, it's not something from an evolutionary point of view that we were meant to hold on to. It's like every trigger, every news story brings us to a point of fight, flight, freeze response mode. And that's not exactly how we were meant to live. So we have to acknowledge the fact that this is something that occurs. And, there's no sort of quote unquote cure for it other than the fact that we have to take really good care of our boundaries. For me, that means, I read the news in the morning. Maybe during a very busy news cycle, I might check in one more time at the end of my workday, but that's it. And I know that there's a sort of parameter within which I interact with, learn, bear witness to the suffering of the world through the news. But then I'm not refreshing CNN.com every 5 minutes because I'm trying to get the latest. It's sort of, we could drive ourselves pretty mad around that. So I think to acknowledge that there are times where we might need to establish some sense of boundaries around people, the news, and other things like that, that might feel harmful to us, that can ultimately protect our well-being.
Thank you, Lodro, for being here, for writing this new book. I can't wait for all the listeners to get their hands on You Are Good, You Are Enough. Where can people learn more about you, learn more about the book, stay connected?
I am pretty easily found. A lot of my most recent stuff is always going to be at lodrorinzler.com. So LODRORINZLER.com. And includes, a whole page dedicated to the book and a whole page dedicated to the meditations in the book. So you could listen to those for free right now. And otherwise, I'm found at Instagram under my name, Lodro Rinzler, to some extent, Facebook or X, but not as much.
Thank you for being here and for sharing all of your wisdom with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on again. It's so wonderful to reconnect.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Centered in the City podcast. As you let all of this goodness settle in your own heart, mind, and body, I welcome you to check in and think about what are some of your biggest takeaways from this episode that you want to start to integrate in your life. Is it just recognizing that you yourself are good and whole and complete at the core of who you are? Do you want to practice noticing and naming shame or guilt when it arises? Are you curious about what it would be like if you looked at others through this lens of they are good, they are whole and complete? Whether that's in a romantic partnership, a coworker, strangers on the street, people you hear about in the news, what might shift in your life? We can continue this conversation on Instagram. Let Lodro and I know what you're taking away from this episode, what's coming alive for you. Reach out, DM us, share this episode with somebody in your life. And most importantly, get this book and start this practice of connecting to your basic goodness. And I promise you, it will shift and transform your life. And if you're looking for some more one-on-one support in meeting those places and parts of yourself that have had stories where you aren't good enough, and believe me, I've been there, and you're wanting support untangling from them so you can really set yourself free to connect and live the life that you want, I welcome you to sign up for a connection call linked in the show notes. It's an opportunity to explore how mindfulness coaching can support you and your life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting us in your ears, your heart, your mind. And until next time, stay centered.